Welcome back to another episode of True Crime Untold Cases. I'm your host, Harper Quinn. In the quiet farming town of LaPorte, Indiana, the early 1900s saw the emergence of one of America's most prolific female serial killers. Standing 6 feet tall and weighing over 200 pounds, Belle Gunness was an imposing Norwegian immigrant who lured unsuspecting suitors to her farm through personal ads, promising love and partnership. Instead, these men found only death, their bodies buried beneath her hog pen. When authorities finally closed in, Belle's farm mysteriously burned to the ground, leaving behind a headless corpse and dozens of unanswered questions. Was the body really hers? Did she escape to continue her killing spree elsewhere? Tonight, we unravel the chilling tale of the Black Widow of LaPorte. Let's begin. In the spring of 1908, the quiet farming community of LaPorte, Indiana, was about to uncover one of the most horrifying series of murders in American history. The tale begins with a Norwegian immigrant named Brynhild Palsdatter Sturseth, who would later become known as Belle Gunness, one of America's most prolific female serial killers. Standing nearly 6 feet tall and weighing over 200 pounds, Belle was an imposing figure who used her seemingly innocent status as a widow to lure unsuspecting men to their deaths. Her story begins in Norway, where she was born in 1859, the youngest of 8 children in a poor family. Like many Europeans of her time, she saw America as a land of opportunity and immigrated in 1881, settling initially in Chicago. The first suspicious death connected to Belle occurred in Chicago, where she married Mads Sorensen in 1884. The couple opened a confectionery store which mysteriously burned down soon after they purchased insurance for it. The insurance payout helped them buy a new home, but tragedy seemed to follow Belle wherever she went. Both of her children with Sorensen died as infants from acute colitis, a condition that causes inflammation in the digestive system. While this might have been natural in an era of high infant mortality, later events would cast these deaths in a more sinister light. On July 30th, 1900, Mads Sorensen died on the one day when 2 life insurance policies on him overlapped. The official cause was listed as cerebral hemorrhage, but rumors circulated that he had been poisoned. Belle collected $8,500 from his life insurance policies, a substantial sum for the time. The timing was suspicious enough that Sorensen's family demanded an investigation, but nothing came of it. With her newfound wealth, Belle purchased a farm in LaPorte, Indiana, where she would begin the most notorious chapter of her life. The 42-acre property would later become known as a death farm, but at the time, it represented a fresh start for the widow. She quickly married Peter Gunness, a local man with 2 daughters. Within a week of their marriage, Peter's infant daughter died while under Belle's care. 8 months later, Peter himself died in what was described as a tragic accident. A meat grinder supposedly fell from a high shelf and struck him on the head. Once again, Belle collected insurance money and became the sole owner of the farm. She began placing personal advertisements in Norwegian-language newspapers, presenting herself as a wealthy widow looking for a husband to help manage her property. The ads were carefully crafted to appeal to men with means, specifically requesting that potential suitors bring their life savings to invest in her farm. One of her first known victims through this scheme was John Moe, who arrived at the farm with $1,000 in his pocket to discuss marriage. He was never seen again. Another victim, George Anderson, actually managed to escape after waking up one night to find Belle standing over his bed, studying him intently. Unnerved, he fled the farm the next morning with his savings intact, becoming one of the few men known to have survived an encounter with the Black Widow of LaPorte. The most well-documented case was that of Andrew Helgelien, a Norwegian farmer from South Dakota. Belle exchanged numerous letters with him over several months, slowly convincing him to liquidate his assets and bring the money to her farm. The letters, which survived and were later used as evidence, showed Belle's manipulative nature and skill at deception. She wrote, "My heart beats in wild rapture for you, my Andrew. I love you. Come prepared to stay forever." Helgelien arrived at Belle's farm in January 1908 with over $20,800 in cash. Like the others before him, he vanished without a trace. His brother, Asle Helgelien, became suspicious when Andrew's letters suddenly stopped and began making inquiries about his whereabouts. This persistent investigation would eventually lead to the unraveling of Belle's carefully constructed facade. The mystery deepened on April 28, 1908, when Belle's farm burned to the ground. In the smouldering ruins, 4 bodies were discovered, 3 children and 1 headless adult woman. The children were identified as Belle's daughters Myrtle and Lucy, and her foster daughter Belle Gunness. The adult body was initially assumed to be Belle herself, but this is where the story takes an even more intriguing turn. Ray Lamphere, Belle's hired hand, who had previously been fired and was known to be infatuated with her, was arrested for arson and murder. However, during his trial, evidence emerged that suggested the body thought to be Belle's might have been someone else entirely. The woman's body was significantly smaller than Belle's imposing frame, and a set of gold bridgework that Belle was known to have was never found in the ruins. As investigators began to dig deeper into the mystery of the farm fire, they made a horrifying discovery that would shake the entire community to its core. Acting on information from Asle Helgelien about his missing brother, authorities began excavating Belle's property. What they found beneath the soil of her hog pen would cement Belle Gunness's place in criminal history as one of America's most prolific serial killers. The first body they uncovered was wrapped in gunny sacks and burlap, the decomposed remains of Andrew Helgelien himself. But this was just the beginning. As they continued to dig, more bodies emerged from the earth, each telling its own tale of horror. The victims had been dismembered, their bodies butchered with surgical precision. Some had been doused with quicklime to speed decomposition. In total, the authorities would uncover the remains of 11 people, though the actual body count was suspected to be much higher. Joe Maxson, another hired hand who had worked on the farm, later testified about suspicious late-night activities he had witnessed. He recalled Belle frequently working in the basement after midnight, the sound of meat grinding often echoing through the house. She would explain these nocturnal activities as preparation of sausage, but given the discoveries in the hog pen, these memories took on a far more sinister meaning. The investigation also revealed Belle's methodical approach to murder. She kept detailed correspondence with her victims, which painted a picture of her calculated methodology. In one letter to a potential suitor, she wrote, "My heart is true and tender to those I love. But those who have deceived me have found me as hard as steel." These words would prove to be more than mere metaphor. Among the recovered letters was correspondence with a man named Henry Gerholt of Scandinavia, Wisconsin. He had written to Belle, "I have sold my farm and am ready to join you with $1,500 in cash." Like so many others, Gerholt had disappeared after traveling to Porte. The authorities found that Belle had a consistent pattern. She would insist that her suitors convert their assets to cash, come alone to the farm, and tell no one about their plans. Further investigation into Belle's past revealed more suspicious deaths. In addition to her husbands and their children, several farmhands had vanished without trace over the years. Each disappearance followed a similar pattern. The men would arrive with their life savings, and Belle would later explain their absence by claiming they had simply moved on to other opportunities. The trial of Ray Lamphere provided more insights into Belle's operations. Lamphere, who had worked as Belle's handyman and was briefly her lover, testified that he had helped her dispose of bodies, but insisted he had never participated in the murders themselves. He described how Belle would serve her victims coffee laced with strychnine, and once they were incapacitated, she would split their heads with a meat cleaver. According to Lamphere, Belle was remarkably strong and could handle the bodies of grown men on her own. Lamphere also made a stunning claim about the fire that had supposedly claimed Belle's life. He stated that Belle had planned her own disappearance, hiring a woman from Chicago to serve as her body double. According to his testimony, Belle had killed this woman and her own children, placed their bodies in the house, and then set the fire to fake her own death. Lamphere claimed he had helped Belle escape with a large amount of cash, estimated to be around $250,000 in today's money. This theory gained credibility when Dr. John Meyer, who performed the autopsy on the headless body found in the ruins, noted significant discrepancies. The body was estimated to weigh between 150 and 170 pounds, far less than Belle's known weight of over 200 pounds. Additionally, the woman's feet were much too small to match Belle's size 8 shoes found at the scene. The mystery of Belle's fate spawned numerous sightings over the following years. She was reportedly seen in cities across America, from Los Angeles to New York. In 1931, a woman named Esther Carlson was arrested in Los Angeles for poisoning August Lindstrom for money. The woman bore a striking resemblance to Belle Gunness and used similar methods, but she died in jail before her true identity could be established. The impact of Belle's crimes extended far beyond LaPorte. Her case became one of the earliest examples of a female serial killer in American history, challenging the prevailing notion that women were incapable of such violence. The fact that she targeted men specifically, using their romantic hopes and financial ambitions against them, made her crimes particularly shocking for the era. The investigation into Belle's victims continued for years after the fire. Families of missing men came forward with stories of relatives who had gone to LaPorte in response to Belle's advertisements, never to be heard from again. Many of these cases could never be definitively linked to Belle due to the destruction of evidence in the fire and the decomposed state of the recovered remains. Local legends say that Belle's farm remained cursed long after the murders. Subsequent owners reported strange occurrences, unexplained noises, tools moving on their own, and an oppressive feeling that seemed to hang over the property. Whether these stories were born from genuine supernatural activity or simply the psychological impact of knowing the land's dark history, they added another layer to the already complex legacy of the LaPorte murder farm. The investigation into Belle Gunness's crimes sparked a nationwide sensation, with newspapers across the country running lurid headlines about the female Bluebeard and her death farm. Reporters descended upon LaPorte, turning the quiet farming community into a macabre tourist attraction. People came from miles around to watch the excavation work, some even taking pieces of the farm as souvenirs. The authorities' examination of Belle's financial records revealed the true scope of her operations. Bank records showed that she had accumulated considerable wealth through her schemes. Besides the insurance payments from her husband's deaths, she had managed to amass significant sums from her victims. One bank account under her name contained over $20,000, equivalent to roughly $500,000 today. Among the evidence recovered from the farm were several personal items belonging to victims that Belle had failed to dispose of. These included pocket watches, rings, and other jewelry that helped identify some of the bodies. Perhaps most chilling were the personal effects of her own children, small toys and clothing that suggested their murders had been premeditated rather than impulsive acts. The detail of Belle's methodology became clearer as more evidence emerged. According to household staff who had worked at the farm, Belle maintained a strict routine. She would often prepare elaborate meals for her guests, insisting they eat heartily. These meals, investigators believed, were likely laced with strychnine, which she obtained by claiming she needed to poison rats on the farm. The poison would have caused an agonizing death, with victims experiencing violent muscle spasms and convulsions before succumbing. One of the most haunting pieces of evidence was Belle's personal diary, partially damaged in the fire but still readable in parts. In it, she detailed her daily life with an unsettling normalcy, making casual mentions of farm work and social calls alongside cryptic references to what she called her special work. One entry read, "Finished the special work in the basement tonight. The earth is always hungry for more." The investigation also uncovered Belle's sophisticated understanding of body disposal. She used quicklime strategically to accelerate decomposition, and her butchering techniques suggested someone with knowledge of anatomy. This led some investigators to speculate that she might have had medical training or experience working in slaughterhouses during her time in Chicago. Further testimony from LaPorte residents painted a picture of Belle as a respected member of the community. She regularly attended church, participated in social events, and was known for her generosity to neighbors in need. This carefully cultivated public image made her crimes all the more shocking. As one neighbor later testified, "She could serve you coffee and cookies while discussing the weather, knowing full well there was a body buried under her barn." The case of Ray Lamphere took several unexpected turns. While he was ultimately convicted of arson, he was acquitted of murder charges. During his imprisonment, he provided detailed information about Belle's crimes to a Catholic priest, Reverend E.A. Schell. Lamphere died in prison of tuberculosis in 1909, but not before making a deathbed confession that supported his earlier claims about Belle's escape. According to Lamphere's final testimony, Belle had methodically planned her disappearance for months. She had secured a body double through connections in Chicago's Norwegian community, selecting a woman of similar build but smaller stature. On the night of the fire, Belle allegedly drugged her children and the woman, placed their bodies in the house, and started the fire using gasoline and kerosene. Lamphere claimed he had driven her to the train station, where she boarded a train with 2 trunks full of cash and valuables. The search for Belle Gunness continued for decades. In 1931, the Los Angeles arrest of Esther Carlson created a stir. Like Belle, Carlson was a Norwegian immigrant who had poisoned a man for his money. She died of tuberculosis while awaiting trial, and while many believed she was Belle Gunness, this was never conclusively proven. The timing would have made sense. Belle would have been in her early 70s by then. Other reported sightings placed Belle in various locations across the country. A woman matching her description was seen running a brothel in Chicago in the 1920s. Another report placed her in a small farming community in Minnesota, living under an assumed name. Each lead was investigated, but none provided definitive proof of Belle's survival. The psychological profile of Belle Gunness fascinated early criminologists. She represented a new type of killer, one who combined calculated financial motivation with what appeared to be a genuine pleasure in the act of murder. Her ability to maintain a respectable public persona while committing horrific crimes became a template for understanding how serial killers could hide in plain sight. One of the most disturbing aspects of the case was Belle's treatment of her own children. While she showed no mercy to her adult victims, the murder of her children suggested a level of depravity that shocked even hardened investigators. Some speculated that she killed them to eliminate witnesses, while others believed she simply saw them as obstacles to her escape plan. The impact of Belle's crimes on LaPorte lasted for generations. The farm where she committed her murders became known locally as Murder Farm and remained uninhabited for many years. Local children would dare each other to spend the night on the property, and stories circulated about ghostly figures seen wandering the grounds at night. The site became a dark landmark in Indiana history, drawing curious visitors and paranormal investigators for decades to come. the legacy of Belle Gunness continued to haunt Laporte long after the initial investigation concluded. In the 1920s, a series of letters began arriving at the Laporte Sheriff's Office, purportedly written by Belle herself. The letters, postmarked from various locations across the country, contained details about the murders that had never been made public. While some dismissed these as hoaxes, handwriting experts who examined them noted striking similarities to Belle's known writing style. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence supporting the theory of Belle's escape came from a railroad worker who came forward in 1931. He recalled helping a large woman matching Belle's description load 2 heavy trunks onto a train bound for Chicago on the morning after the fire. The woman had been wearing a heavy veil and appeared anxious, paying him generously to keep quiet about their interaction. This testimony aligned perfectly with Ray Lamphere's account of Belle's escape. The investigation into Belle's background in Norway also yielded disturbing insights. Records showed that several suspicious deaths had occurred in her childhood community, including 2 young men who had been courting her. While these deaths had been attributed to accidents at the time, the pattern of young men dying in her proximity had begun long before she reached American shores. In 1938, a woman named Esther Carlson was arrested in Los Angeles for poisoning August Lindstrom for his money. The similarities to Belle's case were striking. Carlson was a Norwegian immigrant of similar age and build, who had targeted a Norwegian man using similar methods. When Carlson died in custody, many believed Belle's story had finally come to an end. However, the body was claimed by relatives before authorities could make a definitive identification. The discovery of additional victims continued well into the 1920s. As the land around Belle's former property was developed, construction workers occasionally uncovered human remains. In 1921, a contractor building a new road near the former farm discovered 2 skeletons buried roughly 6 feet deep. The bodies showed signs of dismemberment consistent with Belle's known methods, suggesting her victim count was even higher than initially believed. The psychological impact on the survivors of Belle's victims was profound. Families who had lost fathers, brothers, and sons to her schemes struggled with both grief and shame. Many had dismissed their loved ones' disappearances as abandonment, only to later discover they had fallen victim to one of America's most prolific serial killers. Support groups formed among these families, some of which continued meeting well into the 1940s. One particularly haunting aspect of the case emerged through the testimony of Belle's surviving foster daughter, Jenny Olson. Before her death in the fire, Jenny had confided in a friend about witnessing strange activities in the farmhouse basement. She described hearing muffled screams late at night and seeing Belle cleaning unusual stains from the floor. When the friend urged her to go to the authorities, Jenny reportedly replied, "If I told anyone what goes on here, I would be killed like the others." The methods Belle used to dispose of bodies revealed a chilling efficiency. She would typically dismember victims in the basement, using her knowledge of butchering to reduce bodies to manageable pieces. These would then be buried in the hog pen, where the disturbed earth would not appear suspicious. She often planted vegetables over the burial sites, creating a macabre garden fertilized by her victims. Local folklore about Belle's farm took on a life of its own. Farmers reported that crops planted in the soil where bodies were found grew unusually large but bore bitter fruit. Stories circulated about ghostly figures seen walking the property at night, and some claimed to hear the sounds of screaming coming from the empty basement foundation long after the house had burned down. The case had a lasting impact on American law enforcement, particularly regarding missing persons investigations. Belle's ability to operate for so long without detection highlighted the need for better communication between police departments and more thorough investigation of disappearances. The case also led to increased scrutiny of newspaper personal advertisements, which had been Belle's primary method of luring victims. The question of Belle's true fate remains one of criminology's most intriguing mysteries. If she did escape the fire, as many believe, she would have had both the resources and the cunning to establish a new identity. Her knowledge of butchering and poison, combined with her ability to charm and manipulate, made her a particularly dangerous killer. The possibility that she continued claiming victims under different identities has haunted investigators for over a century. In the decades following the case, numerous books and articles attempted to estimate Belle's total number of victims. While 11 bodies were officially recovered from the farm, evidence suggested the true count could be as high as 40. Bank records showed deposits corresponding to the disappearances of at least 25 men who had responded to her advertisements, though their bodies were never found. The site of Belle's farm became a dark tourist attraction, drawing visitors from across the country. In the 1950s, a local entrepreneur attempted to turn the property into a museum, but community opposition forced the project to be abandoned. Today, the land remains private property, though it continues to attract paranormal investigators and true crime enthusiasts. The psychological fascination with Belle Gunness extended well into the modern era, as criminal profilers and forensic psychologists studied her case to better understand female serial killers. Unlike many of her male counterparts, Belle's murders were not sexually motivated, but driven by a combination of greed and what appeared to be a genuine pleasure in the act of killing. Her ability to maintain a convincing facade of normalcy while committing horrific crimes became a template for understanding how predators could integrate themselves into society. The impact of Belle's crimes resonated particularly strongly with the immigrant communities of the early 1900s. Many of her victims were Norwegian immigrants like herself, who had come to America seeking better lives. Her exploitation of these shared cultural connections and the trust within immigrant communities added another layer of betrayal to her crimes. The Norwegian American newspapers that had once carried her matrimonial advertisements later became vehicles for warnings about predatory schemes targeting immigrants. In 1947, an elderly woman in a Los Angeles nursing home made a deathbed confession claiming to be Belle Gunness. She provided details about the Porte murders that seemed to match unpublished police records. However, before authorities could properly investigate her claims, she passed away. The woman's body was cremated before any definitive identification could be made, adding yet another tantalizing possibility to the mystery of Belle's fate. The discovery of Belle's personal effects in the fire debris provided fascinating insights into her character. Among the items recovered was a collection of books on toxicology and human anatomy, suggesting she had studied her deadly craft with academic precision. Her personal library also included several volumes on insurance law and estate planning, indicating the calculated nature of her financial schemes. Forensic analysis of the remains found on her property, conducted years later using modern techniques, revealed additional details about her methods. The precision of the dismemberment cuts suggested someone with significant anatomical knowledge, while trace evidence of various poisons indicated she had experimented with different methods of killing before settling on her preferred combination of drugging and physical violence. The children who died in the fire, Myrtle, Lucy, and Philip, became symbols of Belle's ultimate depravity. While she had shown calculating efficiency in killing for profit, the murder of her own children suggested a level of evil that transcended mere financial motivation. Some investigators theorized that the children's deaths were necessary for her elaborate escape plan, while others believed she simply couldn't bear to leave any witnesses alive. In 1931, a woman arrested for murder in Montana bore such a striking resemblance to Belle that authorities launched a full investigation. This suspect had also targeted wealthy men through personal advertisements and had amassed considerable wealth through suspicious deaths. While ultimately proven not to be Belle, the case demonstrated how her methodology had influenced other female killers of the era. The Laporte murder farm became part of American folklore, inspiring numerous books, articles, and dramatic adaptations. Each new generation discovered the story anew, finding in it elements that resonated with their own era's anxieties about trust, deception, and the darkness that can lurk behind respectable facades. The case remains one of the most compelling examples of how a killer could exploit the societal constraints and expectations placed on women to avoid detection. Modern criminal profilers have suggested that Belle Gunness represents a unique category of serial killer, one who combined the methodical planning of a black widow with the brutality of a hands-on killer. Her physical strength and willingness to personally dismember her victims set her apart from other female killers of her era, who typically relied solely on poison or other indirect methods. The question of whether Belle Gunness escaped justice continues to intrigue crime historians and researchers. If she did survive the fire, as substantial evidence suggests, she would have had the financial resources and cunning to establish a new identity anywhere in America. The possibility that she continued killing under different names remains one of criminology's most disturbing unknowns. Today, the site of Belle's farm is marked only by a small plaque commemorating the victims. The land itself has been subdivided and developed, but local residents still report unusual occurrences, unexplained noises, strange lights, and an overwhelming sense of dread that seems to permeate the property. Whether these phenomena are supernatural or simply the psychological effect of knowing the land's dark history, they serve as a lasting reminder of one of America's most notorious killers. The case of Belle Gunness stands as a testament to the darkness that can exist behind seemingly normal facades, and how societal assumptions about gender can blind people to the presence of evil. Her story continues to fascinate and horrify, serving as a reminder that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like a hard-working widow on a quiet farm in Indiana, serving coffee to unsuspecting guests while planning their demise.